In October of 1962, deep beneath the Caribbean Sea, a Soviet submarine sat trapped, its batteries dying, its air turning toxic, its crew certain that World War III had already started somewhere above them. The captain gave an order to launch a nuclear torpedo. Under Soviet protocol, it needed one more signature to fire. One man, in a cramped, sweltering control room, said no. Most historians agree that single word may have saved the world. By late October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis had pushed the United States and the Soviet Union closer to nuclear war than at any point before or since. The U.S. had discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida, and responded with a naval blockade, calling it a quarantine around the island. What the American Navy didn't know was that 4 Soviet submarines had been sent alongside the ships heading to Cuba, and each one was secretly carrying a nuclear-tipped torpedo, not a conventional weapon, a weapon capable of devastating an entire fleet in a single strike. One of those submarines was B-59, and on October 27th, a day now remembered by historians simply as Black Saturday, it was about to become the most dangerous vessel on Earth. B-59 had been submerged for days, cut off from any radio contact with Moscow. Inside, conditions had turned brutal. The submarine's air conditioning had failed in the tropical heat, pushing temperatures in some compartments past 45 degrees Celsius, well over 110 Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide levels were climbing. The crew was exhausted, dehydrated, and had no idea what was happening in the outside world. Then American destroyers found them. Following standard protocol, U.S. Navy ships began dropping small practice depth charges near the submarine, a signal meant to force it to surface for identification. To the American command, this was a routine, almost polite way of saying, "We see you, come up." To the men trapped inside B-59, exhausted, and without any contact from Moscow to tell them otherwise, it felt like an attack. The explosions rattled the hull again and again. Captain Valentin Savitsky became convinced that war had already broken out on the surface, and that his orders were now to respond in kind. He gave the order to arm the nuclear torpedo. Here is the detail most people never learn about this moment. On most Soviet submarines, the captain alone could authorize a nuclear launch. But B-59 was different. It carried a senior flotilla commander on board, a man named Vasily Arkhipov, and because of his rank, Soviet protocol required all 3 senior officers on the sub, the captain, the political officer, and Arkhipov, to agree unanimously before the torpedo could fire. 2 men said yes. Arkhipov said no. What followed was, by several accounts, a furious argument in a cramped, overheated submarine, thousands of feet from anyone who could tell them what was actually happening above the water. Arkhipov argued that the depth charges weren't an attack, that they were too small, too controlled, to be the opening shots of a war. He pushed the captain to surface instead, and make contact with Moscow before doing anything that couldn't be undone. Eventually, exhausted, and without any other path forward, Savitsky agreed. B-59 rose to the surface, into the middle of the American fleet that had been hunting it. Confused and furious, but no longer trapped, they awaited new orders instead of firing. The nuclear torpedo never launched. B-59 eventually returned to the Soviet Union, its role in the crisis kept secret for decades. For years, the closest the world came to nuclear war in 1962 was believed to be a story purely about presidents and missiles on land, Kennedy, Khrushchev, tense phone lines, and a naval blockade. It wasn't until the 1990s, when Cold War documents were declassified, that historians learned about B-59 and the vote that almost ended in catastrophe. Since then, Vasily Arkhipov has been credited by multiple historians and former U.S. defense officials as, quite possibly, the single person most responsible for preventing a nuclear war that would have killed millions. He never sought recognition for it in his lifetime. He simply refused to agree on a rule requiring unanimous consent that most people alive at the time never even knew existed. The Cuban Missile Crisis is remembered as a standoff between two world leaders, but its closest call happened underwater, in a room most people have still never heard of, decided by one man who chose caution, over a room full of pressure telling him otherwise. If moments like this interest you, one is already waiting for you right here,